listening to CaveRadioBroadcasting.com. The words and opinions you are about to hear are of the hosts and do not reflect the management of CaveRadioBroadcasting.com.
Good afternoon and welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. Today's Thursday, August 10th, year of our Lord, 2017. You are listening to a Gen Pop Media production. You know, I want to start out by saying that the whole purpose of this show is just to stimulate intelligent debate. All we're trying to get across here is that if something doesn't sound right, odds are it's probably not right. So do some research, man. Don't take what we're saying as gospel, unless, of course, we're quoting the gospel. But, you know, just go out and if something doesn't look right, do your own research. We've got the biggest library in the history of the world at our fingertips with the internet. And you can go out there and you can don't just find one website that echoes your opinion and dig that. You know, look at a bunch of websites, look at opposing opinions, do your research scientifically, and you will find that the answers we're given are not always the answers that are true, because there are no more secrets, only ignorance. So today, we got Debiasi and Tony in the studio. How you doing, gentlemen?
Good. Fantastic.
Hooper is on a writing break, I would imagine.
I hope.
Yeah.
Because that would be okay. I mean, as long as it's nothing serious.
Yeah, hopefully it's nothing serious.
He's not here, anyway.
Yeah, he's not with us today.
Right.
Yeah.
Physically.
Yeah, well, it's not that he's no longer with us. He's just not with us right now.
Right, in the room.
Yeah, I'm sure he's with us cosmically.
Sure, I'm sure he is. Yeah.
So,
I'm not hearing Dave through
I don't know. We got some.
The meters are coming up, but the phones
the meters are there, so you're being heard.
Way loud, way low.
Headphones are weird.
I think it's the headphones.
Huh?
With headphones. See, you said, huh? You don't
exactly.
hear me?
Exactly. I can barely hear myself.
Should never happen on a radio show.
Yeah, right.
I'll figure it out.
So, there are some interesting things going on in current events. Today we want to talk about the flood, but I figure we'd start out what's going on in current events, what we were discussing outside, North Korea, and some of these other things. So I'll just kind of throw it out there and say, hey, guys, what's on your mind?
North Korea? The only thing I really care about at this point is that nothing happens until the 25th.
So you're good with a 26 bombing?
I'm fine with it. I don't care.
Okay.
As long as my wife and kids are back home, then I could care less. At least we can watch it burn together.
There you go.
Because we're not in control of it anyway, so why worry about it?
Dave and I were talking a little bit before the show, and I tend to think that this seems to be more of a, hey, look over here kind of event. I mean, these people, are we really that? If I were in South Korea, I would be concerned because you're right next to each other.
Yeah, I'd be freaking out.
The U.S., we're really not. I'm not that worried. I know a lot of people aren't that worried, but you get a lot of people in the media who are just, sky is falling. And
well, I just refuse to believe that we're gonna have a nuclear exchange. I mean, I can't believe it. I mean, that if we didn't have one back on the Cuban Missile Crisis,
we almost did.
But they averted it.
Yeah.
So I mean, cooler heads prevailed. I can't believe that. Even if Trump is the person that many want to paint him to be, even if he's this, bully in the sandbox, I can't believe even he can rationalize how the world would be a better place if we turned North Korea to glass.
All right, I'll concede on that one.
Dude, there are how many hundreds of there are billions of North Koreans?
No, I don't know, but. If it is what it is on face value, and I'm not even sure that it is,
right?
And you have this maniac leader in this hermit nation that has indoctrinated his people beyond repair, and he's lobbing missiles all over the place, and now he's able to fit these missiles with nuclear warheads, and now he's saying he's going to drop some on Japan and Guam. Are you just going to sit back and wait till he does it? Because there's a lot more people in Japan and Guam that are our allies to worry about first.
Well, absolutely.
So he's going to sit back and wait.
Do you think a preemptive nuclear strike is the way to go?
No, I would not use nuclear at all.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Even if they do.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
We have plenty of other stuff. We have plenty of other stuff to use. I mean, we could literally flatten that place
Well, if I had any
nukes.
any real faith in our intelligence services, they could always go in and, take them out. But I mean,
I'm not even sure
they didn't do so well with Castro. So.
I'm just not convinced in this case that it's what it is at face value. I just am not buying it 100%. I'm just not. I don't have any basis for this. I just
you know why I don't buy it is because a very good point that was made is that everyone was up in arms about going to war with Russia because they interfered in an election. Okay, Hillary Clinton said if they interfere with our election machines, that it should be an act of war, right? So everyone is saying, hey, we want to go fight Russia because they interfered in an election. But yet, here's a guy in North Korea that arguably could do zero harm to the U.S., maybe to some allies, but all of a sudden we're scared of him.
Yeah, stop throwing threats.
Yeah.
You're going to make this guy mad. Whatever. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the people who refuse to live in fear quit spouting that the second Trump got elected. All the people that that were the reason why we voted for Trump was because we were concerned about some things going on, which because we were concerned about things automatically made us fearmongers. We all of a sudden we had no reason to you're just being unreasonable. And these same people now, the second Trump's elected, are the most afraid people on the planet. Because nothing Trump's done has fed into anything, but it's what he could do based on what he's done. Well, look at what he's done. I mean, that could lead to blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah,
he's going to turn into Hitler.
Well,
Godzilla could eat my SUV.
Well, it literally takes 30 seconds to get to the point where Trump's literally Hitler. I mean, we see this all the time.
Oh, I hear you. Yeah.
And it's nonsense. I mean, considering that we actually have video and audio of Hillary Clinton on international TV stating that if she was elected president that we will attack Iran. Those are her exact words verbatim. So you can speculate about what this guy might do, but we know what she said she was going to do. And just going and attacking Iran, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, why? Just going to go attack them? Because
why?
Well, what is it that they're doing? They're always threatening the U.S. They're always threatening Israel.
But it's just threats.
Well, what's the difference here? I mean, they're testing nukes. They're painting death to Israel while they're testing their missiles. Iran is. So there's really no behavioral differences here. But when she says stuff like that, she's the bastion of.
Well, again, the butt Hillary, butt Obama, that's not allowed anymore. It's not allowed because Trump won. If Hillary would have won, and then we say but somebody else, that would have been fine.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't see any real.
The rules of the game go 180.
There's
when your candidate's not in office.
Yeah,
Howard, there is no, and you know this. There is no logical arguments to be had with many of these people.
No, and I'm trying to find them. Because I suffered through Obama's presidency. I didn't agree with a lot of the things he did. I didn't agree with many of the things he did, but I didn't demonize the people who did agree with the things he did and thought that it was a frickin' utopia while Obama was in president, and we're just dying to put Hillary in office.
Let's break that down, because that's an interesting point to me, is that if you say something negative towards Obama, it was because of his race,
right,
or because of something with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're a right wing, whatever.
They had to label you, and it was because of this. You could not say, hey, I don't like Obama because he said on TV in front of everybody, hey, you don't want terrorists on the no-fly list to have a gun. We don't want that. We want to control that. And my first question was, this guy has got to be, he's smarter than this. He's got to either be lying or there's an agenda there. And that is, he knows that you can be put on the no-fly list like no. So if you've got a gun, oh, Dave DiBiase, boom, you're on the no-fly list.
There. Right? Try to get off of
you're
it now.
You're an ex-military guy, because there's laws there that they were going after the guy, the military's guys who are going to come after your gun, or you're not going to get health care and you're not going to get your benefits.
And old people, too.
Yeah. So that's manipulation. So if you say something against that, they wanted to label you. You couldn't argue that point.
Yeah,
whatever
even,
the point is.
Even go to something that's less abstract than, like, say, the gun debate.
Mm-hmm.
Something that is raw numbers, it's easy math, and it's something everybody understands, which is money. So as a senator, you had Barack Obama come out and make a public speech on TV. And you can find this, where he said, at the time we were $9 trillion in debt.
Mm-hmm.
And he came out and said that size of national debt is both irresponsible and unpatriotic.
Absolutely.
Then went on to become president and double it.
Right. Yeah, I saw that. I read that.
So
before.
this is you could say that you don't like that, and they would still find a way to label you for that statement. When this is clear numbers, I mean, this is easy math at this point. He didn't do anything to reduce the debt. He just increased it.
Right.
So, but you couldn't even pick that apart.
There's nothing that you can pull apart
because he had once he got in there, he had to well, all right. All I said is that I don't like it, and I think what he did was wrong.
Well, the interesting thing is that this is a paradigm that you get into, is that if you say something against Obama, then you're a right wing.
Yeah,
you're in this box. You're a right wing Republican, conservative, what have you.
Oh, dude,
right?
you're being too kind. You're being
You'd
too
be a
kind. You say
neo-Nazi
something
at
against
this point.
Obama, you're a racist.
Yeah.
Well, not only
because
that,
the only
but this,
reason,
at minimum,
the only
this
reason
is
that
a
you
box.
could possibly not agree with Barack Obama is because he's black.
Well, that's an argument that's been made to my face before.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's ridiculous
ludicrous
because it's all policy based things that I disagree with.
Right.
See,
I've said this before on the show. I actually kind of like the guy. Like, I don't know issues with him.
Hey, man, out of the last several presidents, okay, since Ronnie's off the table,
Yeah.
if you got a chance to sit down with two of the last several presidents, I'd want to hang out with Slick Willie and Barack Obama.
I would just pick one. I would hang out with Obama.
Because they
Screw those other guys.
seem like the coolest guys. I mean, obviously, we're not going to talk policy, but if we're just going to go hit some golf balls and tell some jokes.
Yeah, I would probably kick it with Barack, dude.
Well,
Slick Willie can stay home.
I liked Clinton, man.
No, not me, dude. He's a... Come on.
Oh,
Still don't
I
like
bought
him.
it, dude. I bought it. You
Still buying it?
No, God, not
Okay,
anymore.
'cause I don't even want to hang out with that guy. I feel dirty. I'll take a shower.
See, I would.
Well, I'd want to see if I could get him to cop to something.
I think you could make an argument that Obama was one thing before he got in, and then once he got in, I can't say for sure that he was not being manipulated.
Oh, who knows? I think they all are on some level. I mean,
I look back at his previous, where he came from, and how he got to be where he was at, and I think, wait a minute.
he's got pretty
That's not
radical
logical.
roots,
That's-
dude.
Yeah,
I mean,
that doesn't make sense.
it's pretty radical
No,
roots.
I think Obama was exactly the same when he came out as he
Well,
came
his only
in. And-
voting record
and he
that-
feels job well done.
Well, the only voting record I'm aware of as a senator is he cast a vote in favor of partial birth abortions.
He was the
That's really his legacy.
deciding vote.
Yeah, it was his legacy as a senator. So you could dissect that however you want.
Right.
But anyone who make the case for partial birth abortions is disgusting, and it's not a debate I wish to have. So
You don't want to hang out with him, then.
while I can hang out, we can be friends, but we won't talk about that because if you start defending that by any, I mean that's
Here's the flip
it's
side.
indefensible in my opinion, dude. You
Here's
can't
the flip
defend
side of
it.
that. What I was going to say is, and this is where the difference is, prior to Obama, where everyone's a racist, or you have something personally against you, if you're not just a right wing conservative, or you're a racist, or these kind of names,
Yeah.
right? But if you were against Bush, you'd get labeled kind of the same way on the opposite side of the spectrum. You're a liberal,
Of course,
Democrat.
It's the same
blah, blah, blah.
dynamic.
But that is a normal dynamic. But what's different now I can hear myself.
Nice.
What was different now
Okay,
is
it only
that
took me 15 minutes. My bad.
It's okay. We're good.
now you're labeled. It's like if you say something bad against Obama, you're a racist or whatever, homophobe, or if you're
Right. If you say
for
something
Trump,
good about Trump, you're a racist,
right,
homophobe.
That's the difference. It's not
Right.
just political. It's not just political anymore.
Well, I think we talked about that article slightly last week. I think we might even do a show on it coming up, it looks like. But that article that you circulated by Dr. Goski, was it? Goski?
Yeah, it's a strange name.
Grosky?
Something like that, yeah.
And I thought one of the Goska, that one of the best arguments she made in the thing was that back in the 60s when she protested the Vietnam War, and she's talking about her group, it's not about everybody, but she was talking about changes in the liberal, in the way liberals think. And back in the 60s when she was protesting Vietnam, 60s and 70s, she protested because she believed in peace. Okay? She was against war. She believed in peace, so she protested the war. And then she noticed by the time they were protesting the Iraq War, one of her buddies is like, "Hey, man, you going to the protest today?" And she's like, "Oh, what's going on?" And he runs, "Oh, yeah, we're having a protest for the Iraq War." And she's like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, protesting war is always good." He's like, "Yeah, I hate Bush." Okay, so in the 60s and 70s, they were protesting for what they believed in, for what they wanted. By the 90s, they were protesting what they hated.
Well, and now, and this is a natural progression, actually, with evil. Now they're just violent.
Right.
So now it's come full swing
Well,
into violence.
That's right. And I just had another conversation with somebody that said that when you're talking to these people, and you guys are aware you've talked to the same types of people, that number one, they're hate-filled, okay? And number two, first thing that comes up is violence. You're not going to change these people's minds with any kind of logic, right? So the danger is...
Yeah, they're too far gone.
Okay, so we feel that they're too far gone. So the next step that Dave's
Send them to North Korea.
Next step that Dave's talking about is they're going to turn violent.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to do anything because you can't get through to them.
Well, they've already turned violent.
And it's going to get worse.
It will get worse.
Yeah. There's no way for it not to get worse because these people aren't going to, unless there's something miraculous happens, they're not going to all of a sudden say, "Oh, I was wrong about that." That's not going to happen. These people are, you can point out example after example, show them right to their face like we've talked about, not going to see it.
Well, there's another thing, too, to point out here is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of anything that's ever changed as a result of a protest. Can you think of anything?
No.
Okay. So, from a logical standpoint, as a thinking person, protests are a complete waste of time. And they should find another way to invoke the changes they seek. Because standing on a street corner with a sign with crap painted on your body and virtue signaling about stuff you think you care about,
to play advocate,
it doesn't change anything.
To play devil's advocate, a protest in and of itself probably has never changed anything. I would say it definitely has never changed anything.
Well, the protest,
but you have to bring awareness. Because, there was dealing with the single-payer issue we were talking about in the healthcare system. I ran across an article in the United States of a young girl who had mitochondrial something or other.
Okay.
And so she was suffering from illnesses, and she was under treatment at a well-known facility, but her parents happened to live in Boston, and she got the flu. So they went in to get her treated for the flu because she was having a really bad case of the flu. And while she was at the doctor's, her parents, like any parents with a kid that has a chronic illness, are running down, well, these are her medications, and she has this and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. The doctors at Boston, at the university, it's whatever hospital is fed by Harvard Medical School, so it's a world-renowned hospital, Boston's Children's Hospital, decided, she doesn't have that. She doesn't have that. You guys are crazy. You're getting her treated for the wrong thing. They removed her from their custody. They decided that her ailments were mental and not physical and put this girl in a mental health ward for 18 months. Okay? Now, people were trying to bring awareness to it. Nothing happened. Well, they had some protests, and there was a husband and wife that were advocating for these parents and for this poor girl. And he hacked their website. He took down their website with help from Anonymous. He through social media, he got a bunch of people, and the idea was to overload their website and break it. Their website and one other affiliated with it. This guy's still sitting in jail 2 years later.
Yeah.
Has not been arraigned, but that girl's been released.
Well, so
because they made enough noise.
Yeah, but that kind of leads to my thought process, is that it wasn't actually the standing on the street corner with a sign yelling and breaking stuff that changed anything. It was actually a proactive effort by hacking
but what
a
I'm
website.
saying is these people, the people who did that, are not related in any way and do not live in the Boston area. They may have never heard about this issue.
Right.
If the protest didn't bring awareness to it for them to get involved and go, you know what, we're going to use our skills to try
I wonder,
and help this
though,
girl.
if it was the protests or if it was, because Anonymous doesn't go to protests to find things. They go online.
Again, it was the guy who did the hacking that was contacted by Anonymous through social media.
Right.
Will help you.
That's my point. That is my point.
But I'm saying, without the protest, this guy may have never knew about this young lady needing help.
True. But it wasn't. So we're kind of making the same point. What you see now is that those people got lucky that anyone noticed their protest.
Right.
Because if you could list on this sheet of paper right now everything that people are protesting right now,
I agree with you, dude.
it's impossible.
Well, there's so much protesting. It totally takes any kind of legitimacy.
That's my point.
It removes the voice. They're protesting everything.
They're just protesting to protest at this point. It could be anything. And they'll get a group gathered in the street, and they start throwing garbage cans around.
No good with the temper tantrums they threw after the presidential election.
Nothing.
Safe spaces, coloring
All
books.
it did was cost money.
Dogs,
a lot of it.
Dogs to pet. Are you kidding me?
A lot of money, dude. A lot of money. And that's my only point, is you got to find, if there's something that you really, really, really care about and want to see changed, standing in the street with a bunch of other soap dodgers with signs and yelling profanities and all this stupid poetry that you see people like Madonna doing, that this does nothing to add any credibility to your...
What about advocating the assassination of the president? Do you think that would help your cause?
No, that should get you in jail.
Oh, okay.
You know, I'm going to...
Except this election cycle.
Except this time, yeah.
I want to bring up one thing that it does, I think that it does, is on that side. If your argument is emotionally based, that protest is what's getting to those people that are emotionally based.
Oh, it's frenzy, dude. It's just mob mentality.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's no order here. They don't even know what they're talking about.
It has nothing to do with this side discusses and this side is, you have a debate. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about tearing at people's heartstrings and at people's emotions to get them fired up and
puppets.
Get them. Yeah,
they're puppets.
Well, again, they're teaching people to use their emotions rather than their brain.
Right.
And that's what I mean. They're indoctrinating them,
and it doesn't matter
in school for that.
And that's an actual perfect lead into what we're talking about today. I like how you worded that because it fits so well.
What's interesting is, like you guys were saying, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just get as many protesters out on as many things.
Well, it's just rile people up.
It's rile people up, right? Exactly. That's what's going on.
Because the silent majority gets nowhere. It's the vocal minority, man.
Here's an important one that I think is very important. I don't know what you guys think. Okay, you guys know Paul Manafort,
the guy that just got raided.
He just got raided.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a guy. I'm not standing up for Paul. I don't know Paul Manafort. I have no idea.
I don't know.
He could be a crook. He could be a saint. I don't know. But what I think is when you look at this story, you got a lot of government officials that have done some shady things that have been brought out. Nothing's happened. There's been no raids. There's been
nothing
investigations, right? All of a sudden, this guy was a Trump. He worked on the Trump campaign for a short period of time to line up delegates, which is part of the process to get elected. He was arguably needed in order for Trump to move to the next step because he needed to get elected. He needed a insider type guy. Not the point. The point here is you've got a raid, a no-knock raid. Early, 6 a.m.?
Yeah.
6 a.m., no-knock raid. And it was justified because they felt that he was going to destroy evidence. Okay.
Well, they would know.
Well, here you go. This is let's take that. This is what they said. It was a no-knock raid. They went in there to make sure that he didn't destroy any evidence. But if you take a step back, he's already been in front of Congress. They already interviewed him. He already turned over a bunch of information. First question I ask myself is, here's a guy that's probably got half a brain to get where he's at.
He's probably already gotten rid of the evidence, I'm thinking.
Would he have evidence in his house? I know I wouldn't.
Well,
that'd be ridiculous.
Well, here's the flip side to that, though, is the DNC has a server they refuse to hand over to the FBI.
Oh, absolutely.
They know that Hillary's camp destroyed evidence.
Including emails after the fact.
And devices. They know this.
Right.
Multiple felonies. That's weird.
But you have people arguing that this is how you know this guy's guilty because they had a no-knock raid. Now, my argument is, okay, first of all, the guy probably doesn't have any. If he does have stuff against him, he doesn't have it there. He's gotten rid of it or something before this time.
We still have the Fourth Amendment. I mean,
right? And this is, we're going to keep going on with this. The next step is, what is a no-knock used for? Usually that's used for when there's somebody that's dangerous, drug dealers, right? People that have arms, people that have weapons, or they've got evidence like contraband on them.
Right, they're going to flush it.
You're going to want to stop it while they have that contraband. So this is totally, as a government agency coming after people like they are, you're thinking like, is this even logical? Why they would even do that? I don't know if, like I said, don't know if the guy is good or bad.
It doesn't matter.
But he's not going to. When they come and bust open the door, he's going to start shredding documents and smashing computers. No, that's not logical. So that tells you there's something else going on other than a raid because
this is clearly
tyrannical governments.
Well, it just expands on the Soviet style. Police state model where this is what happens.
Mm-hmm. This is Nazism. This is brown shirts coming to the door.
It's sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very Stalinist in style where if, you pretty much fall in line or you get raided, right?
Right.
And it goes even so far that if you actually did do something wrong and your neighbors didn't report it, then they'll take cues from the Stasi and they'll prosecute your neighbors for not narking you out, even if they didn't have any clue.
Yeah.
So then what you end up with is not only a police state, but a state that polices itself for the police state. So you have neighbors spying on each other because if your neighbor is doing something illegal and you don't report it, you are also guilty.
Right. Just like that show we were watching.
Yeah. That's the same, colony.
The colony.
It's the same idea, right? So, and that's where they get that from, is that's East German.
Well, they're basing it all on the success of Nazi Germany.
Here's the thing that's interesting, is that you've got these people that look at this and say, oh, obviously he's guilty. They're not using their brain.
Well,
right?
what's being done here by making public statements like that. So a judge signed a warrant.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have probable cause to think that this guy is doing something or has something illegal. Whatever it is. It was enough for a judge to sign a warrant. This doesn't have anything to do with his guilt or innocence. A trial will determine that.
Well, let's play devil's advocate.
So where's due process
in order to get that warrant signed? In your mind, I know we're speculating here, but what could he have where it would take them to bust down the door at 6 a.m., to get that?
Well,
what possibly could he have?
Oh, I think he could possibly have absolutely nothing, and warrants get signed as favors every day.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean he has anything.
Absolutely.
It just means a judge signed it. So what? That's why
they're looking to grab a headline.
That's why we have due process.
Yeah.
It applies to those folks too. I mean, he would have to undergo trial and be convicted in a court of law. And if he's guilty, he's guilty. But if he's not, then you leave him alone, you exonerate him of everything. But anymore, though, you even get accused of something.
No, that's exactly the point.
Then you're guilty forever.
You get accused of it. The media's going to run with it. They're going to put this narrative out there, right? And then it's just going to get dropped. Now,
but he's destroyed.
and he's destroyed. Now there's
mission accomplished.
Yeah,
mission
pretty much.
accomplished. There's
Yeah.
historical evidence to back that. You know, you talk about this. I believe the guy's name was Mark Turin, who was the government was taking to court. They basically ran him out of money, took him through all these court processes, and up until he was. Let me back up. Tell you who he is. He was the guy that apparently was the one supplying the weapons for Benghazi.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. You know, and people say, and I got a question. The first question is, why does the CIA have an operation there? Why isn't anyone asking what that operation is, right? Oh, no, that's just they're just happen to be over there.
Because Barack Obama was in the White House.
When Benghazi got attacked and you know, these guys
CIA's
died.
been everywhere forever.
So, so he said, hey, the State Department, CIA, all this was an operation to supply the terrorists, rebels, whatever you want to call these guys, right, with weapons so they could overthrow Libya and they could overthrow Syria. That's who they're fighting against. So he starts, they take him to court to silence him. They run him out of money, and it gets to the point where he's got his turn in court where he's going to start producing emails. These are Hillary Clinton emails and State Department emails, and saying, hey, here's who directed it through the government for us to run these weapons through there, right? And all of a sudden the court case gets dropped and you hear nothing about it.
Yeah.
And people can't look at a piece of evidence like that and put 2 + 2 together and say, hey, wait a minute, something is going on here.
Well, I mean,
Russia.
Again, it's Russia. But I mean, anyone who, and I don't obviously know this. I don't know that, you know, unless you're directly involved, you would absolutely know it. But you know, you get much of a jigsaw puzzle put together, and even if a lot of the pieces are missing, you know it's a park scene or it's a pond with ducks. Like, you get it, even though the whole thing's not there. I would find it very hard to digest that ambassador that was murdered, because I believe that's what happened. And more planned than just this.
Yeah, whether it was planned or not, he was murdered.
But I mean,
you mean it wasn't a YouTube video?
I think there was people responsible for his murder that didn't actually murder him physically.
So you think he was assassinated?
Well, I guess he was allowed to die. Because
he was allowed to die.
Because
sure.
I think, and I don't know, I can't prove it. It's just, it's just my opinion, is that he knew full well what was going on with this gun running business.
Yeah, and I think he was trying to stop it.
And they shut him up. No, I can't prove it.
Whether they did it or not, your point taken is that it was allowed, and that is factual.
That is factual.
Because that was actually brought out in a
So then the
Hollywood
question
movie.
is, why was it allowed? You see what I mean?
Exactly.
It's a little bit weird.
And they can...
exactly. That's exactly right.
And whoever wants to dispute the facts in the book or the movie 13 Hours...
Mm-hmm.
Good luck.
Feel free.
Oh, that's an awesome movie.
Because I would much rather trust a Navy SEAL than a politician.
Absolutely.
So if you got Hillary saying one thing and you got Navy SEAL families saying, no, she told us it was there's video of her saying it was a video.
Right. Oh, yeah. The president said it too. And so did, what's her name? Secretary, whatever.
Condoleezza Rice?
Yeah, she went around and that next morning.
Susan Rice.
Susan Rice. One of 5 different...
I get her mixed up with
one of 5 different shows talking about this YouTube video. Yeah. And then that poor guy who made that movie years before,
yes,
he ended up sitting there rotting in a prison for I forget how long. For what? You see how they did this, right?
But they made a bunch of terrorists get a pile naked.
Well, I mean... So,
well, see, you were talking about North Korea earlier. Here's another one that's like with the terrorism.
Okay, we're going to wrap with this because we got to get on topic here.
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, we'll go into next week with it then.
Last thing. The North Korea, you and I agree that he starts rattling his saber. President Trump rattled his saber right back.
Yeah.
He was crazier than the crazy guy. You go ahead and try that, and we're going to blow you, to smithereens, right?
Yeah.
I think most people would say, yeah, that's what you do. You stick up. I mean, even if North Korea is being played, or if they are playing us.
Well, that's if your candidate's in the White House.
Well, it's like this terrorism thing. I think we probably all agree that the U.S. sponsors a bunch of this terrorism. They create a lot of the stuff that's going on in the Middle East.
I am willing to say that I am in the 90 percentile certain that if it wasn't for the U.S. government, there would be no ISIS.
Well, I would never say that. It would just be a different name. There's always been ISIS.
I'm saying ISIS.
There's always been ISIS.
There's
always.
Different groups, and there's
since 600 AD. There's been ISIS,
and they're being used. Okay, whether it's ISIS, Al Qaeda,
doesn't matter.
Whatever name
you want to stick on it.
They're being used for a purpose, just like you could argue 9/11. Could be used for a purpose, right? The point is, Trump's stuck with it. We're stuck with it now. The cat's out of the bag. This is going on. So now you either stand up and stop it, or else you're going to get wiped out.
Well, I mean, the fatal mistake that's been made is the naive optimism, once again, that we can step in there, and even if our intentions are the best, if it is an Islamic state we're talking about, they will never willingly accept help from us because we're unbelievers. This is why you have these conflicts like we have. Because even if we're helping, they don't want our help. Because they can't accept our help. It's against their belief system.
They'll take it for a time.
Then obviously it's not all about their religion, because part of the reason why they're mad at us is that we were helping them and then we withdrew our help.
That's the narrative.
Well,
I mean, this is Osama bin Laden in a nutshell.
Well, we're still there. I mean, so
well, therefore, then they're taking our money,
right?
Well, it's not to say that they're not going to.
I'm not saying they're coming from a position of anything other than evil, but to think that we can somehow, because it's, I don't know, the year 2000 plus, that this is going to change fundamental facts that have always been in place, where simply they just don't want us there in any way, shape, or form, even if we are helping, because the real fundamentalists know that they can't accept help from us, which is why embassies are always being bombed. This is why this happens. That's why the German embassy just got bombed, some weeks ago. Because, and then what is their statement is, well, it doesn't matter, we're not going to let this deter us. We're determined to stay here and help. The problem is that they're there helping.
Right.
That's the problem. So,
and the real reason we're there is not necessarily to help. It's so that we can maintain a presence and know what's going on as quickly as possible. And a lot of it is strategic in case the Muslim countries around them are going to strike at the U.S.
Well, and a lot of it, and I hate to use the cliche whatever lines, but, oil plays a part in this too.
No. Really?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. Just a little bit.
I don't believe it.
But anyway.
Okay, so we're gonna get on to Dave. Dave is gonna lead here for a second. He's gonna tell us about. He has got some interesting information on the concept of a global flood.
Well, it's more than a concept. It's
more than a theory.
It actually did happen. So I don't have a real concrete structure to it. I put some stuff together. Most of it's in my head. But I thought it would be cool to do a show about the flood because, and I think we touched on this before at a show maybe last year or something.
Yeah.
So
in
anyway,
conjunction with other topics.
Yeah, yeah. But it's for me anyway, it's one of, if probably not my favorite, what you want to call Bible story, right? And once I started digging into it, I realized that the flood was more than just a story about a guy in a boat and a bunch of animals. That's essentially the story, but it's actually a lot bigger than that, and it's often not really talked about, not really taught. They kind of touch on it,
right?
As like this kind of thing happened. But this thing that happened was so big, and really is what. Everyone goes back to Adam and Eve as far as the origin of humanity, which it was. But you really have to look at the flood and the people that were there to really see where the origin of this humanity came from.
Right.
Because, yes, we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, but really we're directly descended from 8 people, right? Because that was all who was on the ark. So it's an interesting study because you can. The one thing I read that I thought was really interesting is it was a commentary on the flood, right? Noah, the ark, all this thing. And it was actually a Christian commentary, which I was a little surprised by. So I think it probably wasn't, but they claimed they were. But they pretty much said that the story of Noah's ark is more symbolic, metaphorical, like,
Right, that's a common fantasy.
To urge people to do good and to, because this flood story, quote unquote, is more of a, I guess metaphor is the right word. It would be like a way you explain to kids where babies come from without really telling them where babies come from.
Okay.
Like, birds and the bees kind of thing.
Right.
But you do a candy-coated version. Like, this was just a made-up story to kind of, like, get people to get the gears meshing about doing the right thing. But that's thin. I mean, it's actually... not only do we know for a fact that the global flood absolutely happened, anyone at this point, at least in my opinion, that would deny it doesn't really understand the science behind it, because most, I would think, from science or just ancient cultures, have an account of a global flood.
Right.
It's not just in a Christian.
No, in fact, there's no less than 277 accounts of a global flood. And some people place it, if you include all the stories that even include, including a pre-flood reality, right? Like there was life before. They have stories about the pre-flood Earth, the condition, and then this global flood destroyed everything, and only a certain amount of people made it to the other side, namely in a boat. Some people claim there's upwards of 2,000 of these accounts from all the cultures all around the planet.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. China has a really interesting flood, they say mythology, but no, it's not mythology. It actually happened. And it's a legend, and I forget the Chinese names. I'd have to look it up again. But it's a well-known Chinese legend. It was like the very first, coming from the very first dynasty of China. And the symbol for that event, because, Chinese language doesn't use letters, they use symbols, and it's all sounds. So each symbol represents something else other than the word. So if I said your name, the symbol actually means like a chicken sitting in a tree or something like this. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That's how this language originated. So the symbol for this actually means 8 people in a vessel.
You're saying this is the Chinese...
The Chinese legend. And all of these cultures that have a time stamp on it all seem to put the flood right around the same time, roughly 3000 BC. Which is also kind of interesting because you'll have Mesoamerican cultures over here that have a very, very similar story to cultures that were totally disconnected not only by time, but by geography, right? Mm-hmm. All the way over into the Middle East to like ancient Sumeria that has their own flood account. Ancient Egypt, which actually was birthed as a result of the flood, according to their own belief system. And this goes on and on and on and on. So they have all these different accounts of a flood. So from a religious / belief system, cultural aspect. Just about every culture on the planet has some, not only a creation story, but also a story of this global flood. And I find it interesting that, the creation stories all kind of vary a little bit, but a flood is a flood.
It's pretty specific.
So, they all have the same story. In fact, the flood is important to me because it kind of gives you the map for how, we don't know exactly how, but we can speculate based on what we know, how evil found its way back in, because in the book of Genesis it even says it will, and referring to the giants, which is the Nephilim, which is the
fallen
offspring
angels
of the Bene Ha Elohim, which is the fallen angels, and human women. You'll notice that Greek mythology, Roman mythology, has very, very similar type stories with the Titans and, the Zeus, all of these things.
All these gods, so-called
demigods, right? All of these things. Alexander the Great, legendary conqueror, had most of the known world conquered in his early 30s. Was purported that his father was actually Jupiter, so making him what we would consider a demigod. Also, on the same line of thought, we can map out every single culture that has popped up directly after the flood. We have records for all of them, by the way. And if you look on a map, all these cultures originate where the ark landed, and they all fan out from there. The very first that we have record of is ancient Sumeria, which I would contend is the first big civilization post-flood. And they have their own flood account, and they also have their own account of Nephilim, of giants, Gilgamesh being a specific example. He's always depicted as being gigantic, holding a lion like a house cat. I don't think that some renderings are artistic and other ones are realistic. I think they were really actually representing what was going on there, what they actually were seeing. And this is not unique to Sumeria or the case in Genesis. It's actually also in ancient Egypt, where the first king is always depicted as this giant man.
Can I ask a question? Now you're talking about the giants, right? Most of the things I hear about the giants is always the same things. Giant in height, but also it's always a reference of 6 fingers and 6 toes.
Not always, but yeah, that seems to be a trait
of
them. In fact, Goliath is an example in the Bible that has 6 fingers. And then, of course, the legends of Native Americans, how they say hi, they put their hand up.
So that you can see how many fingers
so
they have.
The legend is to see that they're actually not Nephilim, right?
Yeah.
And it's, talking about the giants, there's actually, and Native Americans, there's a guy, I wrote down a quote from him, because he wrote a book. He's a lawyer, and he's Native American, so he's always active in tribal affairs and etc. I'm not doing him justice, but he wrote a book called, his name's Vine Deloria. He wrote a book called Holocaust of the Giants, and it's the Smithsonian cover-up. He wrote a book about it.
Okay.
And he has a quote that was interesting. Excuse me. And it reads like this. Some of these old county and regional history books contain real gems because the people were not subjected to rigid indoctrination about evolution and were astonished about what they found and honestly reported it. Because there's cases in New York Times, London Times, all these major newspapers and local of these finds. And there's
in the 1800s?
1800s. And
Yeah.
it all went into the 1900s, too. And where you see a fall-off, and I don't know if it's related, I guess it probably could be, but you see a fall-off in this right around the time television came out. There's no more newspaper articles about giants anymore. In fact, I forget the guy's name, but he's probably the most respected Egyptologist, archaeologist guy that's ever lived. And this was back in the 1800s. He made a statement that I found very interesting about them finding a new race. Now, this is while digging in ruins of ancient Egypt, right, in the 1800s, I think 1850-ish, something like this. And he said there's a new race that was not only very tall, but very powerful. And interesting, he referred to it as a new race. And he said that this race is represented both by paintings, renderings, right, inscriptions in their texts, but also by their bodily remains. Now, that's a direct quote from this guy. So they're finding bodies of these things as well. You see the same sort of biological weirdness going on in Central and South America, especially like Peru, and always around blood altar type sites like the Mayan, where they're doing human sacrifice, cutting out hearts, rolling heads down pyramids. They're finding these, and you've seen these elongated skulls that are always explained away by head binding and all this, but there's a certain amount of them that can't be explained away by head binding because they're missing features that a normal human skull would have, and head binding doesn't make those disappear. There's a word for it, but everyone's seen a skull.
Oh, you're talking about the fusion
yeah, those, exactly. They're totally missing from these skulls. So they're definitely something different, and you even see pharaohs and different figures depicted this way in other ancient cultures, Egypt being one. And now they're on the other side of the world from Central America, South America, but yet you still have these depictions of these really weird-looking people, man, with strange facial features, big eyes, elongated heads. And they, you know, this just supports...
Yeah, because I think the argument against that theory is that people would tie things around their heads,
and they do this,
and to expand it, which they've shown in some cases that,
of course,
some people did that, but I guess it was theorized.
Nothing hotter
it was
than a chick with a long skull.
Yeah.
It was to mimic these,
to mimic something,
right. And I have seen I've seen the pictures that you're talking about where they don't have the fusion lines between the skull, you know, between the plates in the skull. It's totally different,
right,
on these skulls. There's no.
And usually, what you know, you'll get a couple of blurbs from guys like us about things like that, and that's about all the press it gets, because they'll be like, well, I just forget about that, and you know, it's kind of like finding soft tissue in dinosaur bones, which we'll get to later, but. So we're pretty much before the break. I mean, because we're going to break soon, right?
Yep, 2 minutes.
We can pretty much deduce at this point that it's pretty common knowledge that there's at least accounts of a global flood from every culture.
Right.
Has a story like this, save not one, I don't think. Even what we consider the most primitive native cultures have very similar creation stories and have accounts of this global flood where it's very specific. I mean, the Tolkate Indians, they even put a year on it.
Really?
And it's the same story where, you know, everybody except for a certain amount of people on this boat were destroyed. The whole earth was destroyed by a flood, and they survived, and that's the origin of what we now consider mankind. So it's almost like the stories are Noah light. And ancient Egypt actually went the other way. I think it can be demonstrated that Satan was totally in charge of that kingdom. It was definitely a pagan nation, and their whole flood story, if you really read into it, it actually gives credit to the darkness for everything, which is very interesting.
Well, you could argue that the darkness did cause the flood.
Well, you know what I'm saying. I mean, it's the legend they have about the flood is all pagan gods. The all-seeing eye comes from that. story.
Can we recap before we get into that, because we're going to go to break? I just want to get straight that what you're trying to say here is what we're talking about is there's a story of Adam and Eve. There was people before the flood.
Oh yeah,
right. There's
Adam and Eve were before the flood.
Well, Adam and Eve before the flood. You had a whole population.
There's a lot of people before the flood.
A lot. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Maybe
There's
more
a lot
people
of
than are here
before
now.
the flood. There's all these stories of why there was the flood, right? Regardless of that, there was we believe a flood, and it's science is even trying to explain it now.
Pretty much backs it up,
right? They're backing
Well, I'd
it
say
up.
there's stronger science for the fact that there was a great flood than there is for evolution.
Yeah, well,
for sure.
and they're kind of covering that. But there was a flood. There were 8 people left, and this is probably where we'll pick off, right?
Yep.
The next
yeah.
So all these people, flood happened. All these people got wiped out. From that flood, there were 8 people, and then society started popping up after that, and they all have the same stories.
Now, the angles of their stories, you can trace.
Stories. There's a little
well,
bit.
you can trace it back to their belief systems, and they either have it upside down and backwards, right? And they're actually giving glory to Satan without maybe knowing it. Or you have the other side of it, which recognizes the flood for what it actually was. So we can get into that a little bit after the break.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, we will pick this up after the break. We will be right back. Welcome back to Down the Rabbit Hole. We are midway through our topic today, which is the Great Flood. We have we've talked about the fact that that pretty much any ancient civilization that has any type of recorded history has a version of the Great Flood story. And basically it just brings us up to the fact that there was a civilization prior to the flood. And basically it boils down to 8 people survived it. And we are all descendants of those 8 people.
And those 8 people were who?
Noah, his wife, and his
2 sons and their wives.
Daughter-in-laws,
Yeah.
So
3 sons, sorry.
Right.
Chip, Ernie, and who?
So,
Larry, Curly, and Mo.
Right. Yeah. So
I know Shem was one of them.
yeah, Japheth, Shem, Ham.
Ham, yeah.
And
he was
Ham's our guy.
Yeah, Ham.
Well, not really. That's sarcastic, but he's caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, he has.
And actually, all the pagan nations, and this is kind of a sidebar, but not really, are direct descendants from that bloodline, which is very interesting. The other bloodline being the eventual bloodline that produced Abraham, Jesus,
And that
etc.
was Japheth or Shem?
That would have been Shem.
Okay.
So, anyway, it's just an interesting point. And we do understand why Ham, Canaan, the whole problem there. The Canaanites, which were giants.
I do.
Yeah, it's because Ham raped his mother and had Canaan, right?
Who was a product of incest.
That's her, and rape. And
you're basing that
and he
based
was
on the
cursed.
story that when it doesn't really spell that out in the Bible like that. That's an interpretation.
Actually,
that
it does.
You have to
No,
explain.
it does spell it out, but they say it in a, how do you put this? In a PC way.
Yeah,
Right.
very, very discreetly.
You know, they and it's actually a traditional way to.
Because they say you saw he
saw
saw his
the-
father's nakedness.
He saw the nakedness of his father, which is actually referring to his father's wife. And this is actually a very traditional Hebrew way to refer to something like that. And all Hebrew scholars agree that this is what it's talking about. And honestly, nothing else makes much sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, anyway, the outcome of that, was the Canaanites. And all the other Amalekites and all these, some of them have names that mean vampire-like demon. The Canaanites were giants. And these are all the cultures that God ordered the Israelites to destroy. Not because God is malevolent or this had to be done. What was going on there was nothing good. I mean, that was the land of Baal, all right? So this is Satan's territory here. People were laying down their babies as blood offerings to the horned god, Baal.
So what you're saying is the reason for God, when people, they say, well, how could a God, anyone's God, tell the Israelites to do this? And you're saying the answer is because these people were...
Well, they needed to be purged from that land. They actually, I would argue they weren't totally people.
Mm-hmm.
Just like pre-flood, Earth had a lot of people that weren't actually people. They weren't purely human.
Right.
You'll notice that...
the argument, I think, is in their DNA is impure. It's because it's...
Well, it was corrupted.
Right.
It was absolutely corrupted. This is spelled out and explained for this reason. But, and you'll also notice when we talk about genetic, type, modifying, right, meddling around, this also is contrary to our evolution friends who think that genetic mutations actually produce a stronger, better something. Where what we notice in our meddling, that actually it creates darkness and ugliness, right? Where things don't work. I mean, you create monsters.
Like mutants.
You create monsters. It doesn't get better and stronger and more beautiful. It actually goes the other way. And actually, a lot of them die. I don't know if that's PC anymore. I think you need to find a better way to refer to those. We don't want to offend the mutants. But
so that in theory, it would be like, what's that X-Men? These mutants would be stronger and more powerful, but we don't really see that.
We never see that. Actually, we actually see quite the opposite. Right? You have an extra arm. It doesn't help you. You actually have 3 bad arms.
Yeah.
Not. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So, what would be some claims to say, I don't know, poo-poo the idea of the flood and the whole story of Noah's Ark? Like, well, back then, no one could ever make a vessel that big. They didn't have the technology, this. But we actually have all the measurements for it. We know that it was a gigantic ship. It was huge. And actually designed perfectly. They still model cargo ships after these ratios that were given in the Old Testament.
So what you're saying is that the measurements are given in the Old Testament.
Yeah. And that's what they based the construction of the replica on. That's how they know how big it was.
They've replicated the dimensions that were in the Bible.
Right.
Yeah. And they've done scientific tests on it. And they also did some of you were talking about the weighted counterbalance.
Yeah, where they made a scale model and they actually weighed it down more than it would have been, given a lot of the information that's available as far as how many pairs of animals were actually on the boat. They actually overdid it, and they were actually able to get this thing to capsize under like skyscraper size waves. But what they didn't show is when they added counterweights to the bottom of it. So imagine like gigantic lead sinkers for fishing, right? With an eyelid on the top and a big bell-shaped weight. They hung a bunch of these along the bottom of this vessel, and they were barely able to get this thing to tip sideways. I mean, it stood right straight up and down no matter what they threw at this thing. And interestingly enough, they found in the area that the Ark was purported to land in, which is somewhere in the vicinity of Turkey, I believe.
I think Dave said it's Mount Ararat.
Mount Ararat. They have found these big, giant granite weights that fit that exact description, and they're really not around anything. There's nothing no civilization they can tie these to. They're just kind of out in this arid landscape, dropped randomly for no reason. And they had this big granite pieces with holes bored through them, and they can't even figure out. And one guy had the idea, like maybe, and that's where they got the idea to test the scale model using those weights. The theory is maybe those weights were actually dropped from the Ark. Who knows? We do know, though, that it was about 137 meters long. It's really big. Would rival many ships today, actually. And people make the claim that, well, this never, back that long ago, no one could really build these ships. But interestingly enough, when you look at ship construction throughout history, the more you go back in time, the bigger and grander the ships get. So about the time when Columbus was coming over here in 1492, like the Santa Maria was only 30 meters long. And at the time, this is the most advanced shipbuilding that was available. Like, they were known for, the Spanish armadas were known, but really these ships were kind of janky. They barely worked. I mean, it's kind of surprising it even made it here. I mean, 30 meters isn't a big ship. It's really, really tiny compared to, now you go back from there. So that's like 1492, right? Mm-hmm. So you got ships around that size. You go back to 1000 AD, and Viking longboats were 40 meters plus long. Ancient Chinese ships were colossal. I mean, these things would dwarf the Santa Maria. It looked like a rescue boat, like the
dinghy.
You know what I'm saying? That's what it looked like next to it. And these ships were massive. Ancient Greece, and this would have been like 200 BC-ish. They had these big Navy ships that were almost 130 meters long. So the further we go ahead in time, shipbuilding actually got smaller until we developed things like steel, aluminum. Then we could build these monster ships, but never since ancient times have we mastered building ships out of natural materials like these folks did. So if you're going to follow that pattern, the further back you get yet, you would expect these vessels to be even more colossal if you're going to establish a pattern, right? So it's just interesting to point that out, that the further back in time you go, the bigger ships get. It's not the other way around. In fact, the first time we tried to build a colossal vessel was the unsinkable Titanic,
yeah.
And it went down on its first voyage. But anyway,
interesting point on that. You're talking about gigantic things that would bring up like the pyramids and how these ancient structures were built and how they could try to duplicate that today.
Well,
today's technology,
they can't. They still can't figure out how they did some of this stuff. The other thing to mention here too about pyramids is that if you go from Egypt, you can go ahead and go right over to Mexico, Central, South America, Mesoamerican cultures, the Mayans, Aztecs, Incas. You find this very similar pyramids, very similar belief systems, similar gods, similar rites of sacrifice. And interestingly enough, the serpent is all around all of these things, by the way. It's always part of their belief systems. Quetzalcoatl, which was the Mayan big dude, right? Their main god. He's like, he was the serpent god. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's the same.
It's the same.
The same agents at work here, starting with the largest ziggurat, which is a type of pyramid that we know of, which is the, I think it's the ziggurat of Eridu, and that is attributed to Nimrod, who was not a good guy. Contrary to popular opinion, Nimrod was actually against God, if you actually read the text for what it correctly says.
What a Nimrod.
And that's where that name comes from. So, the more you kind of stack this up, the more it really kind of starts to add up. And interestingly enough, we're talking about outside is, people that adhere to this Darwinian evolution. It's a very convenient way to say, of course, the story of Noah and the flood is just fairy tale, because that goes right against anything they believe. I mean, they would state that, I've heard numbers that there's been world populations on the planet for 100,000 years or more. Okay? That's the claim. these missing links and things, these monkeys they find. But how many people are on the Earth right now? About 6 billion, right? Give or take.
6.5 billion, something like that.
So 6 billion. If you were to do just simple math on this, just like napkin math, and using our own growth rate now, population growth rate, and it's exponential, right? So every year, so the current growth rate is about 2%. So if we just use that as a baseline and figure out, starting with 2 people, that with simple math, which is absolutely ignoring a lot of variables. I get it, right? But this is just to demonstrate something.
Just throwing a ballpark.
It's just to demonstrate. It's just an exercise, and it's going somewhere, because this, to me, is an important fact to consider. If you do simple math on this, you would get to 6 billion people in about 1,100 years, give or take, okay? Now, that's interesting because a lot of people will claim that there's been world populations of some sort for 100,000 years or more, right? But we just use simple math using our own growth rate of today, and we got to 6 billion people in 1,100 years using really stupid simple math. When clearly, if you started with 2 people, the growth rate isn't always 2%. The growth rate of the growth rate is also exponential.
Right.
So it would be kind of silly, because if, given these numbers, if there's been populations for 100,000 years and you use our growth rate of 2%, okay, you would, at this point, we would have surpassed 6 billion people already. Millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of times in 100,000 years, given a 2% growth rate.
Right.
So if there has been world populations on the Earth for 100,000 years, so is claimed, then a very fair question is, where are all the bodies?
Oh, that's a good point.
Where is everybody?
Even if you argue that, because the first argument is survival rate, right? But the point is,
they were here.
They were here. There's births. There has to be some kind of evidence.
Where are all these folks? It's a lot of people. I mean, we're talking about surpassing 6 billion millions of times. We're talking literally about tens of trillions of people. I mean, so it really doesn't really logically make any sense. But what does logically make sense is if you go through and, now I didn't calculate this, obviously. I don't have time to do this, but it makes logical sense. If you were to start with 8 people and do the math based on realistic growth rates and take into consideration as societies grow, they get abilities like, growing crops, and you throw medicine in there and this kind of stuff. Infrastructures per se, you would actually predict that there would be 6 billion people about right now, because actually using those numbers, it would take about 5,000 years to get to 6 billion people if you started with 8.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the year right now?
2017.
Okay, and the flood was 3,000 to 3,500 BC, so 3,500 plus 2,000 is 5,500? Maybe that's a coincidence. I don't know. Sure seems logical to me, though.
Sure.
More than there's just been this lost, populations. So that's all very interesting. And it gives merit to the story of Noah and the flood. Not to mention, we know the boat, the design of the boat, are the most optimized ratios for a heavy hauling cargo ship. In fact, they use the same ratios today for big giant cargo ships that we build. And then, what about, how would all those animals fit on the boat? And it's also a good question. And depending on whose numbers you use, I like to use kind of on the high end, from what I found, is because of what we call speciation, okay? So geneticists would tell you that all dogs come from a pair of something that would be like a gray wolf. Their DNA is a common source.
Are we talking about evolution, or are you talking about
speciation? Is different than evolution.
Yeah.
In other words, all the dogs that you see, big dogs, small dogs,
they came from a certain...
They're still dogs. They're all just dogs. They can't become whales, right?
Mm-hmm.
No matter what.
So what you're trying to say is that there weren't two Doberman Shepherds, two poodles, two...
No. There was a pair of something like a gray wolf.
Gotcha.
And through breeding and environment changes, and we do this. People do this with their dogs now. I mean, they can mix them up and make different
golden doodles,
whatever. You end up with blue variations, etc. So really theoretically need one pair of canines to produce every known canine that's on the earth today, and this is true for every animal kind, as the Bible puts it. Cats. You can have hairless cats and furry cats and big cats and little cats and cats with no tails and all these things, but they're all still just cats. And a cat and a dog do not have the genetic information required to become fish. Or the other way around, by the way. So
they weren't lucky like humans were.
Well, somehow, yeah. So on the high end, you would need somewhere between 17 and 20,000 pairs of animals to produce every known species that we have on the planet today. And if you calculate the numbers on this, and people have, it would fit on that size ship with breathing room. They would not only be comfortable, there would be plenty of space. And then people will say, well, what about the giraffes and the elephants and all these big, huge creatures? Well, I would tend to think that God is smart enough to put babies on that boat. And I would also make the claim that, and I get this from documented history, because we can't pick and choose what's documented history and what's not. If we're going to recognize any of it as documented history, then I think we need to accept all of it as documented history. You don't take one cave painting and say that one's true, and another cave painting and say, well, that one's not true. Because the fact is, you don't know. Maybe they're both not true, or they're both true, unless you were there when it was made and you know the story. You have to just take this as documented history, because that's what we do, right?
It's not fake carving?
It could be fake news, like prehistoric style. But I tend to believe that when you see ancient renderings, sculptures, cave paintings, etc., of anatomically correct dinosaurs, that these people would have no possible way of knowing what these things looked like, because fossils weren't even discovered until much later. That I would, just from deduction.
You guys looked into dinosaurs at all?
Yeah. As far as what?
Well, it's interesting because a bunch of stuff is popping up now about dinosaurs, about that being a hoax. I haven't looked into it at all, but
it's not a hoax.
Dinosaurs definitely existed.
No, people have made this claim that dinosaur fossils are a hoax put there by Satan. Mm-hmm. That's really far out, and I can't buy into that because it's nonsense. What's not nonsense, however, is I would make the claim, based on documented history that we have access to, that dinosaurs were on that boat, and they made it to the other side of the flood. And people would say, well, but these things were gigantic. But there's an interesting thing about reptiles, and it's actually part of their genetic code. We see this all the time if you keep reptiles as pets. If you were to put juvenile dinosaurs on that boat, babies, reptiles are unique in the fact that they will grow to the appropriate size
The environment.
that their environment will support. So if you put a snake in a small aquarium, it will only grow so big. Even though that snake could be 20 feet long, it may stop at 5 and be relatively healthy. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at these big giant dinosaurs that we have plenty of evidence that they were real. In fact, some, interestingly enough, are exact copies of animals we see today. Dragonflies, mosquitoes, crocodiles, many fish, plants. The list goes on and on. That before, well, I would say before the flood, everything was huge. It was a totally different ecosystem, and given what we know about anatomy and biology now, these animals couldn't even breathe here today in this environment at their size. There wouldn't be enough oxygen in the air to even support that life form. They wouldn't even have a chance of surviving, even if they could find enough food, right?
So you're saying because there's not enough carbon dioxide produced, that there's not enough oxygen?
Well, I don't know
everything was so
why.
much bigger?
All I know is that this place was very different before that flood.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think we were even altered genetically as a result of this whole shindig that went down. So, given that, we say, oh, well, we know dinosaurs died 65 million years ago. And I would argue that, no, you don't know that. You think that because you've been told that. But carbon dating has long been proven to be iffy at best. And the other dating methods are grossly out. I mean, they have things that they know are only 100 years old, and they tested it just to see how this thing works. And, oh, it's 200 million years old. So that doesn't work. So the best thing they got going is this is C14, right? Carbon-14 dating. Carbon dating, as it's referred to. But the same people that will use carbon dating to date the age of really old things will also make the claim that oil and coal is the result of decomposing dinosaurs from millions of years ago, and it took that long to form the oil and the coal. But they don't seem to offer an explanation as to why all oil and coal tests young using carbon-14 dating, because it shouldn't have any carbon-14 in it if it's that old. But it does. It's actually got a lot. And so you can expand on that even further, and they've produced coal in laboratories in about 2 weeks. And they've produced oil in laboratories in minutes. So oil and coal is more than just dinosaurs. It is actual entire ecosystems that have been swallowed up and compressed and turned into squish. And that's where oil and coal comes from, because when the flood hit, it coated the whole planet. And in the early days, when they started doing the study of stratigraphy, which is the study of the layers of the Earth's crust, and this is what they typically use to date things, given where they found it, what layer they found it in. They have a name for it. If it's in this layer, it dates between 100 million and 200 million years ago. But they don't really know what they're talking about, because there are anomalies in this that kind of just get ignored. I mean, most people, if you've looked into this, you've seen the example of the petrified tree that grows through every layer. So how did this tree stay there and become fossilized, literally going right through all the layers, representing, 500 million years or whatever number they put on it? Clearly, something's awry. Something's off here, because it doesn't make any sense. Now, if a chunk of it was fossilized in the bottom layer, and then all the other layers are on top, okay, you can make a case that, the tree died and a piece of it got petrified here, and all the other layers built up on top. But it doesn't make sense that the whole tree is intact through every layer.
Right.
So you're going to sit here and tell me that tree got partially... This tree lived 500 million years, first of all, because it wouldn't have been fossilized beyond the ground level that was covered up, right? If what they're saying is true about what created the fossil record. It absolutely destroys that whole... Just that one example destroys that whole case because you can't explain it. But there's a guy that might have explained it a long, long time ago when he actually literally wrote the book on stratigraphy. I think he was a French guy. Something else to look up. And he pretty much wrote the book about stratigraphy, about the study of the Earth's layers of the crust and what created it. And his explanation was very simple. It also happens to be my explanation, that the layers of the Earth's crust were created by the global flood.
Okay.
Now that makes more sense, because the layers are actually also deposited according to density. Now people would claim that this is over time. The ones at the bottom get smashed more, and the one above. Okay, kind of makes sense. But what also makes sense is if you make a slurry of material
settlement
in water and then let it settle, the heavier stuff falls first. Then you can do this in your kitchen to prove this. The pea gravel falls to the bottom, the heavier sand particles next, and it's actually a good way to separate material because it will separate itself according to density. We see this in the Earth's crust.
People use it in their gardens.
Yeah.
Were you looking for William Smith?
Maybe.
He's an English engineer. 1769 to 1839 and 1815, Smith produced the first modern geological map showing rock strata in England and Wales.
It might have been him, yeah. It might have been him. Maybe it wasn't French. He was English.
So the question I have, you always have the opposite side, right? So when you're talking about building an ark, you have the technical side of it. So you've mentioned the technical side of you need a vessel that's this size by this size that holds this much cargo, right? And what I look back at, because everyone dismisses that, like, well, how would they know how to do that? And I guess I look at that as like, well, if that were happening today, would we know how to do that? And it sounds like what you're describing is you can go back and say, yes, if I were going to do that today, this is how we would do it, and it matches that description. Is that a fair statement?
Well, you have to take it a little bit further because the manuscripts state that Noah did what God told him to do.
All right, God was the architect.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's almost like, engineering is in our DNA. I mean, it's like part of what it is to be human. We build stuff, we make stuff, we do stuff. And also, there's a lot of things I take away from the flood story that lead to, they're symbolic in nature, but they lead to, see, the Bible's all about patterns. Mm-hmm. God works in patterns, and they repeat. And when you pick up on these, that's where we get what is the meaning behind what God's trying to tell us. Noah, who was at the time the savior of what was left of mankind, not the Messiah, don't get me wrong, but he was a Messiah type. He also was clearly a carpenter because he built a big giant boat out of wood that saved everything that we know. It just so seems that God has a thing for people that work with their hands. He likes carpenters an awful lot.
Yeah.
In fact, he kind of became one when he came here.
Right.
In the form of Jesus Christ. So that's one kind of parallel that I take away from it. And there's also references to the dark side too. If you look at the basic story is how did he kind of realize that the flood was over? Was he released the dove, and the dove came back with the olive branch. He likes olives too. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but I like olives.
Olives
so
are good.
I'm good with it, yeah.
Olives are
something
good,
about olive
man.
oil and olives or something there.
Olive oil is good for you.
And maybe I'm just, missing something. But there's also another bird, though, that was released off of the Ark. And the language used is very interesting because it was a raven. And this symbol actually pops up all through ancient cultures. All of their pagan gods are always shown when they're deified in artwork with the wings of, a lot of people would say eagle, and I would say it's a raven. Because the raven has always been the symbol of Satan, of darkness, of... And the reason why I say that is because when he released the raven, it just went out to and fro all over the earth and just never came back. And interestingly enough, there's I think it's the book of Job, where Satan and the angels basically have a sit-down meeting with God, and God asks Satan, what have you been doing? And he says, I've been going out to and fro across the earth. He uses the same exact language describing himself as used as for this raven, which really had no use to Noah. It didn't do him any good. He just turned it loose. It didn't do anything for him. But the dove did. So there's symbolism there. And the other thing I find pretty cool is there was only one door to get onto that ark. Only one. There's just one entrance to get on there. And if you watched that movie Noah, with Russell Crowe, was it Russell Crowe?
Yes.
I think he was there.
It's a cool movie. It's not totally biblically accurate, but I still think it's a really cool movie. If you notice in the movie, Noah shuts the door to the boat, to the ark. But that's not the biblical account. And it may, for some people, be a small detail, but I think it's a pretty big detail, because anytime God acts directly like this, something to take note. In the Bible, it was God who shut Noah in. God shut that door. Noah didn't. So it was him who slammed the door shut to literally salvation in the flesh, right? In the physical world. Because anyone who didn't make it on that boat was totally dead meat. I mean, they were drowned. That's it. So when later on in the Bible the same pattern kind of emerges where the gateway to destruction is really big, but the gate to salvation is narrow. And this was literally the case with the ark, because really the gate to destruction was everywhere else. I mean, it was everywhere except that door on the boat. So there's a lot of correlations, a lot of patterns that poke out to me to make it significant to pay attention, right? Mm-hmm. He's doing this for a reason. It could have been anything in there if it's just a fairy tale. But why go that far as to... and then there's mathematical patterns that pop up in the structure of the Bible that you can't even... Once you get into that, you realize that people didn't really write this. And we could do weeks of shows just on that. But we're talking about the flood. When you look at the whole picture, man, when you really look at the whole thing, if you just consider that the flood created the fossil record. The flood is what killed the dinosaurs. And not all of them, though, because then it killed all the animals, too, but not all of them, right? I mean, whatever was on that boat made it. Because we have many, many, many ancient depictions of anatomically correct dinosaurs that we know because we've dug their bones up since. And they're actually depicting these creatures with human handlers and describing that, like especially in Peru. Have you seen these burial stones? Have you ever seen those? There's literally tens of thousands of these things. The biggest collection, I think there's 15,000 or 11,000 in one collection. And they're all about 1500 BC-ish, I think, if they got that right. But they depict people handling dinosaurs, these big lizards, feeding other people to these lizards, depictions that look like maybe these people were even forced into battle against these things. And they look like things that we've dug up. I mean, long necks, the Brontosaurus maybe, or there's other dinosaurs with long necks. The same thing is actually depicted in a lot of the stonework from the very first dynasty in ancient Egypt. And these things, arguably, are absolute correct renditions of a Brontosaurus. Now, how would these people know what a Brontosaurus looks like? I mean, with detail, skin, scales, I mean, how would they even... I'm beyond coincidence at this point. I mean, there's just no way that they would even know what these things look like. We find this in ancient France, same thing, where there's very detailed carvings of these big lizards that are very, very similar to a lot of dinosaur fossils we've dug up. Well, how would these people know what these things... You can't just say this is just creative coincidence. The artist just got it right. I mean, that's a little bit odd. Let's face it.
Yeah, so how if they did not see it with their own eyes, were they able to depict it on a...
Again, if it was just lucky. But I would maybe let that slide if it just looked like a Brontosaurus. So, yeah, that could be. Kids draw stuff. I mean, it kind of looks like something. But it's not just that. I mean, there's at least 4 or 5 that I saw just poking around that, I mean, skeletal structure that there is no way, I mean, to the point where it's accurate. They would have to actually see that animal to get it that right.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't, at this point, it's beyond an accident. I mean, and if you're going to use the fossil record as evidence, okay, that dinosaurs died off 65 million years ago because of an asteroid or disease or all these different theories. It doesn't explain why we find these mass grave sites where you'll have, like, prehistoric horses and fish everywhere. It doesn't make any sense. Why are there fish?
Maybe the horses were hungry.
Outside laying next to the horse. It doesn't make it. How'd the fish get there?
So you're saying with
maybe they crawled out of the ocean.
Okay. How do we have then explain mass grave sites of whale fossils in the middle of the largest, most arid desert on the planet?
Hey, you got me. I'm like,
you see what I'm saying? You start adding this up. I mean, why are there whales there? They were literally in, there's another desert where the archaeologists were digging up penguin fossils in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
So they can go ahead and say, well, you know, before, this wasn't a desert, this was a lush tropical environment. They can try that, but how does that explain the Himalayas covered in shellfish fossils? So much so that it's like local trade to sell these things at flea markets. There's so many of them. I mean, Mount Everest, at the top, they found fossils of seashells. Well, you could go ahead and say, well, you know, tectonics and the mountain ranges form volcanic activity.
It was formed and it was all pushed up.
This actually used to be an ocean, and since this. Or the one-size-fits-all explanation that would explain all of this is that the flood created the fossil record. And that's why you see things where they shouldn't be. Why there's fish next to horses and whales in the desert and seashells in the middle of the Himalayas. But then they'll say, well, what about carbon-14 dating? This stuff is all millions and millions of years old. Except for the ones that aren't, which are dinosaur bones that they've found and have been finding since the 60s, actually, that have intact soft tissue. So how do they explain? I mean, intact, flexible.
And how long will soft tissue last?
Well, I mean, again, I'm leery on numbers that I get from anybody.
So.
But, the one case I can think of specifically that actually put a number on it was that guy out in California that lost his job at the university.
Mm-hmm.
And this was telling to me because I think this is where Satan lets his pants down once in a while. And if you notice it, you're like, oh, busted. Because here was a secular atheist guy. He was a scientist, and his job was to study and catalog dinosaur bones, right? They would do an archaeological dig, bring them to him. He cuts cross sections, writes down data, and gives his report on whatever he's finding. So they bring him, I want to say it was T-Rex, because they've been finding an awful lot of T-Rex bones with soft tissue, to the point where some people even claim these things smell rotten when they dig them up. So he finds intact soft tissue, and he's going through it, and he prepares his professional opinion about what he found with these bones. And he said in his report that, in his professional opinion, because there's intact soft tissue in these bones, they can't possibly be any more than 3,500 years old, give or take. Which is interesting, because that puts it right about the time of the flood. I'm sure that's coincidence. But what was telling about this is he ended up, in turn, losing his job. They fired him.
Right.
And the official statement out of the department was that his religion would not be tolerated in this department.
Right.
But he didn't say anything about religion. He didn't even say the flood did it. All he said was, from what he can see here, his professional opinion is these things can't be any more than 3,500 years old. So when they attack him because of his religion, they pretty much just gave up their hand. You see what deck these guys are playing out of.
Sure.
They just assumed that this was a statement about creation and whatever, when actually all he was doing was telling what he thought about the age of the bones. But this is not unusual. They find soft tissue a lot, but yet they refuse to address it, study it in detail, because a lot of people would lose their jobs. A lot of people that have claimed to be the experts. And you watch these shows.
Scientists never want to make other scientists look bad if they can help it.
It's become a cult. It's become its own religion. And now I love science. But the farther you dig into this, whether it's from biology, from geography, from fossil fuels, from world populations, all of these things, it gives merit to the biblical account of the flood. And then, okay, you don't want to listen to the Bible? Well, every other culture on the planet has a similar story. If you already buy that, and you want to really look deep into the spiritual aspect of what was really going on at the time of the flood and directly after, and map out these nations that rose and fell since the flood, and we have records for all of it. This is where you can really see, you can kind of see the rat tail of Satan through history, where, and all the symbols languages changed, names changed, but all the symbols have remained the same. It's so blatant in my eyes that even, I want to say it was Osiris, one of the really powerful pharaohs early on in Egypt. The claim was that the god Ra, right, or whoever the god of the Egyptian Nu, which is the abyss, which is the underworld, literally ruled Egypt by using the pharaoh's body. That's their beliefs. And interestingly enough, you see this kind of like goat-like symbol. We see this a lot. There's always horns. There's always this, you got the all-seeing eye that's everywhere. This all started post-flood These things were invited back in, just like they were before, and
by these things you're talking about the demonic
fallen angels, demons, the Bene Ha Elohim. The Book of Enoch calls them the Watchers. It's these dark agents that are at work. If you don't think this stuff is real, we could do a whole show that would demonstrate these things are more real than we are, scientifically speaking.
Well, it was an interesting conversation. Facebook conversation was, is Satan real? And it's like, well, it depends on what your definition of real is, because you have things that are the seen and the unseen, right? Yeah. You've got the spiritual entities in the heavenlies, just like Ephesians, right?
Well, we got a couple minutes. What do we got?
About a minute and a half.
All right, that's enough time. Because speaking of scientists, everyone knows who Max Planck is, right? He's the father of basically quantum physics. Here's an interesting quote that kind of goes with this. He said, "All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force, which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." And I think Max Boyle's his name. He gave us the model of the atom. I thought I wrote this down. It doesn't matter because I know it. He said that all things that we consider real, or all things that we call real, are made up of things that cannot be regarded as real. This is referring to the smallest of particles, the things that make up everything, actually aren't real. What we're talking about is pixels of data. And the only way we perceive this world is through the 5 limited senses and whatever else the Holy Spirit gives us. That's pretty limited view. And to think that the only thing that's real is what you can see is actually pretty naive. Because the only thing we can see is the visible light spectrum, which is a very, very small percentage of all light. And actually, if you read into it enough, the world we live in is actually a small subset of a very, very much larger reality, which contains these very ancient, very intelligent entities that we call angels, demons, fallen angels, whatever you want to...
Aliens.
Aliens, which is also demons.
That's a topic for another day, though.
Yeah.
But, so it's time for us to go. We hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week, and to God be the glory. Great things He has done.